Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to this learning experience brought to you by ChaosSearch. My name is Cody, and I'm the host of Techstrong Learning, and we have an exciting presentation ahead. Before we get that ball rolling, we do have just a couple of housekeeping notes that I'd like to go over. First off, today's session is being recorded. So if you miss any of our discussion, perhaps you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend, the on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude this live session today. If you'd like to engage with us, there are a couple of options for you to do so. The first option is the chat tab on the right side of your screen. So if you see that chat tab right now, I'd like you to go ahead and open it up and let us know from where in the world you are joining us. If you have any specific questions for us, we do want you to send those questions to the Q&A tab directly on the right side of the chat tab. Sending in your questions to the Q&A just helps us keep track, and we do want to answer as many of your questions as we can, so send them in early and often. We have a downloadable version of the slides available in the handout section, so if you'd like to grab those, feel free. Those are there for you. And of course, before we close things out today, we will be giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so be sure to stick around for the duration of our conversation. So our topic today is Unleash the Potential of Your Log and Event Data, including AI's Growing Impact. And I'm joined by Andre Rocha, Vice President of Product and Operations at ChaosSearch, and our very own Mike Rothman, Chief Strategy Officer at Techstrong Group and GM of Techstrong Research. So Andre and Mike, thanks so much for joining us today on Techstrong Learning. Mike, do you want to dive into our Pulse Meter report?
I do. So welcome, everybody. Glad that you are here to really kind of dig into where things are going from a log and event data standpoint. And Andre and I were talking a little bit before the session, and we decided that it may not be the best idea if we do the AI drinking game, where anytime we mention AI, you would have to drink. So we are not going to do that, and we don't recommend that at home because obviously anytime you're talking about security topics, anytime you're talking about, really security operations and or observability, AI is a major topic. So what we did is we worked with ChaosSearch and we did what's called a pulse meter survey. So we solicited responses from our audiences, typically in the DevOps.com and Security Boulevard area. So those media sites, we ended up with about 350 responses. So a good response to a series of questions that we will cover and go through as we continue down this path. But log and event data and really kind of the evolution of how we deal with just the exponential growth in data volumes and, kind of the ability that we have to more effectively analyze that data and really kind of provide more and additional context to understand what's happening within not just our infrastructure, but increasingly within our application infrastructure, including things like Kubernetes and other cloud native environments, as well as applications, really is starting to put a stress on the traditional first generation types of platforms that have been in place in order to do that. So we're going to talk about all sorts of different issues, constraints that you have, what are some of the drivers and different, kind of aspects of managing log and event data as we continue down this path towards cloud native. And then we're going to leave a bunch of time to talk about generative AI towards the end, because I know that everybody is very interested in that. So enough yapping from me. Let's get to it. Andre, how are you today, man? And why don't you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what Chaos is about?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Mike and Cody. It's great to be here. And thanks to everyone for joining us. It's great to be here and tell you more about how we think about log and event data and the value that it has for organizations, and how to leverage it both for operational and business use cases, and how we see generative AI kind of fitting into the puzzle. Basically, ChaosSearch is a log and event data management platform that was basically created from the ground up as a cloud native architecture. So we're at the core. We're based on core database innovation that allows you to ingest vast amounts of data and analyze them at scale without retention limits. And with that, you can have better observability, better mean time to resolution, and also unleash the value of that log and event data to drive business results, to understand usage of your digital products so you can drive efficient growth, which is key in this day and age.
Yeah, you bet. And I know you guys do some interesting stuff with object storage and really leveraging a lot of the commodity curve that the cloud providers are driving. So we'll get to that in due time, but we definitely want to highlight some of the capabilities that are really kind of a departure in architecture from the traditional buy a bunch of appliances, rack and stack them, and hope you roll it over enough so that you can figure out what's going on in your environment. Okay, so Pulse Meter. So let's see what our first question was that we asked folks. If I could actually find my cursor. There it is. Good. So do you capture, store, and analyze all of your log and event data? So we really asked this question to get a sense of, the centralization of a lot of the telemetry gathering. Do folks, kind of take from a bunch of different systems? If they've got, cloud and on-prem and another of other places, are they putting all this stuff together to try to leverage the analytical capabilities that we have today in order to again, get to that business value, to really provide that context that Andre was talking about? Our respondents were largely split. There wasn't anything that, kind of jumped out, right? All logs are stored in a central platform was the leading response with 32%, but pretty close after that was aggregating only selected logs. So again, that just has to do with typically security. That's an interesting use case. I've been doing security for 30 something years. And in a lot of cases, you leave the application telemetry and maybe the infrastructure telemetry in one place, centralize the security and or operational, maybe error, maybe debug types of telemetry in another case, so that you can leverage that analytics. So a number of different operational architectures that you can use for that. 21% said, yes, but logs are stored in different places. So that's not really centralizing, but that's okay, right? So, they are getting all their logs. So that's something that we want to think about. And 20% basically don't know, right? Because different teams handle logging. And that's something that we, again, we really need to understand and address, in that, especially as we've kind of moved towards this DevOps reality and application teams really kind of decide what the infrastructure looks like and what a lot of the tooling ends up being. They don't necessarily tell the other folks within infrastructure, observability, and or security what it is that they're doing. So you have some of these folks that really just don't know where the data is, right? You hope they know where their data is, but in terms of all the data, they just don't know. So Andre, in looking at, kind of these results, kind of makes sense in terms of what you see out there working with customers every day?
Yeah, kind of makes sense. I think I think if you had done this a few years ago, you'd have less centralization of logs. I think now you see more and more of that. And I still think that a third is pretty small. And the reason for that is as you have these cloud native architectures, the fragmentation, both of teams and infrastructure, means that having a centralized place where you have all these data is key, not only to have a central source of truth, both across SRE and cybersecurity, but also to bring the developers onto this world. So you can have a central repository where SREs then manage production infrastructure and developers can see the same data and troubleshoot things faster, right? And so the faster you can do that, the better. The problem is always cost and functionality, right? And so because of that, you typically end with these two workarounds. You either have a select few logs. Either you focus on security with SIMs and have less of those logs available on the SRE side. And what that leads is to challenges troubleshooting whenever issues arise, right? And we see that, like, we have one of our customers that is the largest fintech in Europe that has tens of terabytes a day being ingested, that before coming to us used to be on Splunk and have about 10 terabytes a day. And once they moved to us, they multiply their data by 4 times, having spikes that go up to like more than 10 times of their original volume. And the reason for that was that we make it cheaper. So we're able to 4 times their data ingest and cut their cost by 70%. So when you have the ability to both centralize and have all your logs, why wouldn't you? The right. problem is, the bill matters, especially in this year, right? And the other part is the idea that you keep it in different places, or even that you have like different teams managing their own infrastructure. And that sometimes creates the same kind of problems. Either like you have an observability tool that works for the SREs, but then your logs insecure are in another place, and you may not have the same, and you may be stuck in between, and have the logs that are in the other one, and so that doesn't really help you. Or the teams that typically also balloons cost. So we see now more of a move towards the centralization into a single platform across the company, and we see this for example like companies like Equifax, that before us had a lot of different tools across a lot of different teams, and with us they saved about 90% while creating a single source of truth and standardizing their methodologies for troubleshooting and doing threat hunting and the like.
You bet. So let's kind of dig in it, because obviously there's the cost kind of constraint that really kind of prevents a lot of folks from doing that. But for anybody, I mean, if you have gray hair like me, right, you kind of grew up in an environment where you tried to put way too much stuff into, again, a relational database backend like ArcSight, which was built on Oracle, and you could run a report, you could send all your data there, you could run a report, and 3 days later you can check, to get it. Right. So obviously kind of it's not just a cost constraint, but it's also an analytical, horsepower and compute constraint. Because and again, some of the other competitors out there who move towards this workload pricing idea. So, ingest all you want. It's only if you want to use the data, right, that, you end up paying. And why the hell are you ingesting a bunch of data if you're not going to use it? Right. So it all feels like the same to me. But remember, there's not just, kind of the cost piece of it. There's also the reality that you've got to analyze this data at scale in pseudo real time in order to get, some type of value out of all this telemetry that you're gathering. So, what do you tell customers in terms of, hey, you were doing 5 terabytes here, now you can go up to 15, and this thing's not going to, kind of drop over or keel over because of, too much volume in there.
Yeah, 100%. Like if you're still using relational databases to, ingest logs and like data live, good luck, because this table is not really table-like, right? Like these streams change, the schema changes over time. Its live ingestion needs to be available as soon as it's generated, and relational databases were built more for either a batch kind of model that is good for reporting, or even like operational databases kind of world, which is like built for a completely different model, right? And so this big data and big data with flexible analytics. So like when you talk about log and event data, a lot of the underlying database technologies have to do, even with the emergence of Elasticsearch, have to do with search. And the reason is what you're trying to do is look for a needle in a haystack. So you need to search for something very specific over a large swath of data fast. The problem with Elasticsearch and a lot of the other alternatives that are in the market that are more application focused, but have an architecture that is similar to an Elasticsearch, is that it's very expensive to store and scale. And so once you have that problem that your logs keep ballooning, to analyze them, you need to keep them in memory, and you need to explode that infrastructure so you can keep more and more data in memory. Your costs balloon. And so that's why we came to the market with a completely different architecture that basically solves those problems. It's a fully stateless fabric so that we only need compute to ingest and query data, and all the persistence of data is, as you said before, in S3. So that it's the cheapest that you kind of cloud storage that you typically use for archival because of how cheap it is. And in the process, we even make the data about 10 times smaller. So we're built so that we can ingest vast streams of data and basically scale our compute fabric depending on the worker needs. If you need to query, I can auto scale my fabric so that you can have fast queries, but I don't need to persist data in memory. Right. And because of that, I can ingest a lot of data very cost effectively and keep it for as long as you want. And so that's the reason why I said that with cloud native architectures and with cloud scale, you need a cloud native kind of data architecture or a database so that you can do log and event management without analytical limits or ballooning costs.
Right. Well, kind of a misnomer to call it a database, right? But kind of an analytical capability on top of a data store. So
yeah, we're the database. We make the data store fast so that you can use.
Right. Okay. So you guys have a database on top of all of
and so that is that was the whole innovation.
Yep. Got it. All right. So talking about retention, we did ask folks how long would they actually like to retain the data, and longer is better than shorter, right? And again, when you think about kind of how applications changed all the time, but really when you think about an attack, so with the security use case, you've got attackers that really are trying to gain persistence in your environment, really just be there, camp out, exfiltrate as much data as they can, as often as they can, from that standpoint. So again, more seems to be better than less, and the data reflects that, right? 42% over a year, 3 months to a year, and 28%, and 1 month to 3 months is 14%. And anything less than that, again, it's really hard to get a sense of what kind of context you're going to have about what's happening in your environment. And I would even make the case that 3 months is probably light from the standpoint of really being able to draw conclusions about your environment. So to that point, Andre, right, what are some of the issues and limitations that folks are going to run into the longer they want to keep data hot, right? So that you can actually search it and analyze it and use it, within the context for the trending and the anomaly, analysis that you're doing.
And I think so this makes a lot of sense for us, especially because like retention is big in our value proposition. But I think it should be pretty surprising to anyone that looks at the log analytics or observability market, because if you look at a bunch of other vendors in the market, and it can be anything that is out-based like a Logs.io or a Mesmo or like Splunk or a Datadog, all of those typically have retentions that either default or max at about 30 days. And if you see the price as you increase retention, it increases. All of them increase their cost as retention grows. And the reason for that is exactly what we were talking about just a while ago, is this architecture that bundles storage and compute, so that if you want to analyze logs fast, you need to keep them in memory. If you need to keep them in memory, if you want to scale, you need to have more and more compute, and compute is expensive. So that's the crux of it. And with us, because we don't store any data, all data gets stored on the customer's side and in cloud storage, which is the cheapest way to store it. We don't have that problem, right? With us, you can store data for as long as you want, and that is key exactly to all the things that you were talking about, either for security, to analyze latent issues when it comes to troubleshooting, or even to analyze usage of your applications or software products over time. So like that perspective over time is key in log and event, but today is hampered because of the underlying architectures of the vendors in the market.
You bet. Well, I mean, one of the things that I've had to, kind of work with a whole bunch of large enterprises on are these, Faustian bargains per se, right? Which is I can't gather all my data, so I've got to make compromises on what it is that I'm going to look at. But the forensics folks get really pissed off when, they have to come in and they don't get the data, right? So, kind of for a while, I've been advising folks, especially with cloud, centric and cloud centric architectures, is to, send one stream of that data that you really need from a security analysis standpoint, to what the traditional SIEM look like, and then store a lot of the rest of the historical stuff that you can't in something like S3 on object storage, right? So again, folks have a lot of that data. So when you kind of start working with them initially and maybe some of the early engagements, I mean, how long do they really want to keep it? Right? Is it a year minimum? Is it, in perpetuity? Do they have like an archival process where they, kind of decide, all right, I want to have a year hot, but then I want to put stuff into something like Glacier, which is dirt cheap relative to, everything else. So what are folks doing, along those lines?
Yeah, and this is where it depends a little bit with the vendor that they're talking to. Any kind of application, typically you have two things that you can do. You can increase your retention and pay the price. And this goes anywhere from like $1 in small scale all the way to $2.50, $3 a gigabyte for higher retention up to 30 days. And that really adds up, especially as you scale, right? And so beyond that, what you have is like an archival process, right? And it's that archival where you set up your S3 bucket and you send there the data, and then you can keep it for as long as you want, for a year or more, depending on your needs. And again, think about this. The archival, which is the cheap part, is in S3. That's our backend. So like that's how cheaper it can be to go with us versus like the existing solutions, because that's what our architecture kind of enables. And then on the retention front, how long do people need it? And this is where retention is key for the centralization across the organization. because different teams in different industries need different levels of retention. You have highly regulated markets like in the financial sector space where you need years of data for compliance, where you're going to have a report, you need to go fetch it, and you have two solutions. You have it in archival, and you need to bother someone to get it out of there so you can look at it whenever you need it, or you can just keep it hot in a solution like ours, and that can be 3 years, 7 years, 10 years. We have people in financial sectors and that tech space where you can get like really long for regulatory reasons. Then you have application logs where you may want to keep it for a long time to even see either answer support kind of questions that like materialize a lot later, like things like, imagine like you're in a travel booking kind of situation. You want to see what happened when you booked, but you only recognize it when you actually do it, right? So this can take months to actually materialize. And so because of that, you want to keep that for long. But again, you can't in current solutions, and you have these workarounds. And so we see it like application logs, security logs being a big driver of this increase in retention. But if you want to centralize across the organization, then you need to be judged by the maximum that you can provide, right? Because otherwise it needs another system. So that's why we can provide a centralized repository across different teams, so that regardless of your retention, you can have it. And so that's the other side. And finally, what I would mention is that there's another approach, which is the Elasticsearch approach, in which you basically have data tiers. And that is kind of like the whole idea that, you can have it in warm and cold and whatever, frozen. And that sounds great until you actually try to get it and analyze it. And once you try to analyze it, it's slow. And like, okay, then I need it in hot. And then you balloon your cost. And so there's this misnomer around like data tiers. People thought would solve the problem, but they don't. Again, back to the architecture, because Lucene wasn't made, which is the data representation of Elasticsearch, wasn't made to be fast in CloudSearch. So because of that, it's slow. And we were. And so that's why we can remove all these limits.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So I could just talk to you all day about, that one slide, but we do have more data, right? So what would be the top benefit of capturing, analyzing, and being able to query all of your log and event data over long retention periods? And this was, again, a multi-select. So which of the use cases did, folks pick? All are pretty clustered in that, kind of low 20s perspective, which is improved security posture and enhanced visibility. Yeah. Right. And again, not brain surgery on that one, right? Improved visibility over users' behavior over time. And that gets into one of these new use cases that we start to see, right? This whole digital experience thing, which is, folks are very interested in what their, kind of end customers are doing, how they're clicking through, these environments, what kind of response they're getting, kind of what are they clicking on to optimize, the layout of the sites to try to, yield a few more points of conversion on that front. But all of these things, right, and improve mean time to response at 23%. But all of these things, again, require data. Right, requires data and the analysis on top of the data. And to your point, before about centralizing the data, have you had issues where customers, they've got one group that looks at the data, another group that looks at the data, and they don't really like each other. They don't really work together. They've got to, so in that situation, who actually is in charge of the central repository? How do they work with some of these different environments? And let's talk about an environment where it's actually useful and functional as opposed to non-useful and dysfunctional, which I'm sure everybody on the horn, has a lot of experience doing that. So if you can kind of give a sense to the folks, what would a success story be? I think that would be really helpful.
100%. And just as a disclaimer, all our customers, all their users love each other. So I don't know about those that don't like each
That's
other.
Right.
But
Kumbaya.
But we do have customers that basically use us for a variety of different use cases that otherwise would be in different tools. So that I can speak to. And so we have the largest fintech in Europe, again, that has uses us to centralize all their log and event data and use it across different teams, from engineering to SRE to security for threat hunting to even on the business side for analysts on the product side, or even like business analysts, right? And that is the ability to basically centralize all of this data in one place and to not have retention limits was basically what allowed them to do that. And they do fundamentally different things on the same data. And so, which for us look the same, because at the end of the day, you're issuing a query, and the type of queries that they're issuing are fundamentally similar, but in their world is fundamentally different, right? So you have engineers that whenever they push new code, they want to see if it works, or whenever they're asking to troubleshoot something, they want to have the context of what's happening. So they're there. It's key to have them in the same platform as SREs, so that whenever SREs are troubleshooting production infrastructure and they need support from engineering, they can talk with the same data. And it's also important to have the support people to have on the same platform, so that support can have an issue, bring it up, do the beginning of troubleshooting, SREs the further down, and then it goes all the way into engineering, all in the same platform, right? And this is key. Then you have the cybersecurity people who can basically do threat hunting. So they can look at access and see how people have moved from one system to the other and increase their credentials. And this usually can take, like advanced persistent threats, can take anywhere from 6 to 9 months. So like having the retention is key, so you can see all the way back and across the different systems, right? And then on the business side, like this is part of the innovation, was not just we make cloud storage performant, is that our core innovation is flexible. So you can analyze our data via either search API, via an Elasticsearch API, so that the front end is just like a Kibana or OpenSearch dashboards, but we're under the hood, or SQL. And because we have SQL support, you can also enable the business analysts to see trends over time, to do joining different data. So you can see the usage that comes from telemetry to see, okay, user logged in or user used this feature. And that usually comes from a log and event data. And you can map that to a user table to know, like, what are the types of users that I have more in my platform? How is usage evolved in this customer across different teams, and things of that like, right? And so that is why this pie chart for me was very interesting, is the fact that it's pretty balanced. Yeah. Why do you want logs over a long period of time? Different teams for different things, but they would all rather have it, so you can have a true visibility over time. And maybe double clicking on a couple of them, like on the security side, we have customers like Cisco that uses for threat hunting to ingest all the data from all their different networking devices, and can proactively look for potential vulnerabilities in their own infrastructure, so that they can see things before they happen, and can unleash their security analysts onto these large swaths of data, right? So that's a key use case. We have a large streaming service. You would know the name if I tell you, but unfortunately I can't. But that basically built a security lake with us, so they could detect double logins, so that when you have an account and multiple people are using it, I'm sorry everyone that does that and may have been caught because of this, but they use that to see that over time, to see how the changes that they make to the business basically can prevent that, or even bot type of logins. And so it's key to have that perspective over time to be able to do these type of things. And on the user behavior time, again, the big belief when we started this is that all this business data was going to become live data. That events, understanding what happens in software, was going to be key to understand what users do in your application. And that's a leading indicator for everything. How you can churn or upsell, how you can monetize, how you can understand power users to be more of what is key for them, and basically even acquire people that look more and more like them, right? And that's across the organization. And so this ability to have SQL with unlimited retention on events has enabled customers like Style or even like gaming companies, that where this kind of data is key for them to balance gameplay, so that players like it more and more over time and not less. And so that's some of the things that we see.
So when we kind of dig into some of these different use cases, Andre, how much do you guys have to bring to the table in terms of detections and the typical stuff that you would want to look for, as opposed to depending on the customer to really understand what they should be searching for, what kind of detections they should be putting in place, what kind of alerts and thresholds they need to be? So one of the key issues, and we'll talk about that in a second, right, but is that there just aren't enough folks that know how to do analysis. There aren't enough folks that know how to interpret a lot of the data. So how do the tools help them become better at their job? So again, you just kind of be a generic thing, but do you guys spend a lot of time, kind of refining that? Do you have a research team that, is there, working out, kind of what the right stuff to look for is for each of these use cases?
Yeah, so this all depends on what type of data we're talking about and what type of use case. So there are logs that are pretty straightforward, infrastructure logs, security logs. They're relatively structured and they look like relatively similarly. And so with that, we have starter packs, so that if you're on AWS and you use load balancers or VPC flow logs, or your CloudTrail, you can get value from that from day one and start using it to monitor the different activities in your system. But then what we also are great at, and that usually is a big chunk of the volume, are these application logs. And application logs is this broad term that says it's custom. So it depends. And so for all these custom logs, a key issue typically with existing tools in the market is the ability to ingest and give analytical flexibility so that you can actually look at the fields that you want, because they change over time. Like a developer release a new feature, just issue a completely different schema, completely different type of data. So how can I, as an analyst, analyze it as soon as it's created without the system that is in the middle creating field conflicts or not being able to ingest it or whatever? And so we create that analytical flexibility so that you can ingest data as it comes in, and then the analyst can look at it as soon as it comes. And for those, we help our customers ingest it and look at the data to even get some sense of okay, here are things that are probably matter to you. But most of the times, the customers are the ones that have most of the knowledge about it, because they're the ones creating the data, and it's all different by customer. So they are already pretty savvy on that, especially because we come in at scale. And so at scale, typically they're already using something, they already have a problem that they're trying to solve, and we're there to ingest it, so to solve it. And so that is typically depends on the use cases, the short answer.
Well, of course, it depends. But what I was really kind of looking for is those starter kits, right? Because, again, when you walk into some place and they know exactly what they want, that's a slam dunk, right? Okay, I can aggregate all my data. I can give you the ability to analyze it. You can do your searches. Here's how you set up, the detections and the thresholds. The alerts and the thresholds. Here's where you want to send the alerts. Here's your operational motion. Boom, I'm done, right? It's the folks that don't know what they don't know yet that, that becomes very important as we want to scale this up, not just to the elites of the elites, but making sure that everybody can leverage their event and log data to the greatest degree possible.
And we also believe that generative AI will play a big role on that. And I'm probably jumping the gun here, but we believe that that is going to be, and we're working on something that we'll announce soon on that front. But we'll basically do exactly that: democratize the access to the data to all the domain experts, so that you can have basically a helper that is there with you, can communicate in natural language, and can help you interact with the data so that you can solve your business problem. So that you say, how can I, leverage the data that I have for X, and it can help you along that journey. And so you can make domain experts into also tool experts, so you can drive business results faster. And so
drive business results faster. All right, that's great. So now let's talk a little bit about the constraints. And again, in terms of stuff that is fairly predictable, right? What's holding you back? What's holding you back from capturing and analyzing more of your log data and event data, log and event data, and increasing retention? So the choices are: our tools can't scale, data complexity, right? And that's changing schemas, nested JSON, and just different formats, and really different context, right? That's also a huge problem with the data that you're trying to ingest, and costs, and it's basically too expensive. And far and away, the answer was all of the above, right? So everybody has all of these specific problems. Given the conversation we've already had thus far, we've hit on a number of these things as well. But again, I think that when you kind of look at it, and I'll go back to, just the general limitations of a lot of the existing systems that are in place today, they just weren't built for this, right? They just weren't built for this. And we've been trying to, kind of give and with duct tape and baling wire, right? Kind of get these tools, these platforms that really were not built for this level of volume or this level of analysis, to kind of get there. And this is what we have, right? This is what we have. But what I do want to talk a little bit about, kind of the ingestion normalization and really kind of, the index on query approach, right? Because that kind of handles a lot of these data complexity and normalization issues that, again, anybody that's done SIM for a long time probably has a bunch of gray hair like me, because they had to deal with all of that normalization. So can you give us a little bit more, detail on kind of what that looks like and why that's really just such a departure from how, most of the traditional, SIMs and aggregation platforms work?
100%. So on the one hand, people want things that, get set up fast, scale easily, are cheap, and you get value from day one. And so then we believe in the same, that's how tools should work. Reality is you have to pick. If you're unlucky, one, maybe two, and that's kind of like the issue, right? And we were built kind of like from the ground up so you could have all three, and then some. And so on the ingestion and the normalization piece, again, at the core of our company is basically a new data representation that was built to be generic and for live ingestion. So that and with automatic schema detection, so that as you ingest data, whatever it is, we can detect what the fields are, what data types are, so you can get up and running as soon as you ingest data. And also with dynamic mapping of that data, so that if it changes, we automatically detect new fields. You can, again, the whole idea should be should be a set it and forget it kind of system. All right, we need to ingest data, yes, but after that, it should be you should be able to analyze it as it comes in. And that is and this nested JSON is pretty important, because like JSON has become the de facto kind of format, especially in application logs, because it gives a lot of flexibility for the developers, for whoever creates it. You can create it in basically any type of schema, any kind of data format. And because of that, it is very good, because depending on the needs of the data creator, they can adjust what the fields are and what the schema is. The problem is downstream, right? Okay, then I create a lot of flexibility when I create the data, but then the system in the middle cannot really ingest it, or can only ingest it if you define what those fields are, or if the schema evolves, it just throws an error, and all that creates a problem downstream. So that data is created and cannot be analyzed, so that, okay, you had a new field that was very important for you to monitor errors, and now you cannot see it because the system in the middle would not ingest it. And that creates both a problem in analytics on the user side and a problem in management in the middle, which is the people that have to deal with this. It's like, okay, that didn't work. Okay, let me normalize it. Let me create a transformation layer before that, so that I can standardize this. And every single time that something changed, they need to change it. And so that is why we created this flexible ingestion, so that as you send it, we'll ingest it and we'll let it be able to be analyzed as soon as it comes in. And that is essential in application logs, which is why, which, by the way, are key to understanding usage behavior of the system, right? And so for us, the ability to handle this, whatever structure it comes in, was key, a key design principle. And that is fundamentally different from like something like an Elasticsearch that has problems with field mappings, from relational databases that have problems with schema definition, and from some of the other tools like your observability tools or your SIEM tools that are very good for logs that are structured, but as you have custom logs, they kind of were not built for that, and so it creates challenges on that front.
Yeah, you bet. So let's kind of, speaking of observability, speaking of application, logs and really kind of climbing the stack, so to speak, have you implemented a strategy for aggregating the logs from your Kubernetes, microservices, and cloud native environments? All right. So 35% said yes, 25% said on a roadmap, 16% said at the beginning of journey, and 29% say no current plan. So, again, we joked a little bit before about a third seems to be a lot, for not doing anything, given how important this is. But 70% are, right? So you look at it and go, okay, that's certainly progress relative to, where we've been in the past. And then really the next slide kind of gets into it. Has your organization started or considered its journey towards observability, right? Partial observability leads at 28%. And then 24% say, I don't even know what that means, right? And 23% say actively planning, for the journey. So again, both of these, kind of different questions kind of come at the same thing, which is we're still pretty early in kind of this whole, how do I actually leverage all of this telemetry to really impact my application health, impact, these, specific application stacks that are there and built on a lot of these open source and cloud native technologies. So if you were advising some of these folks, and I know you do in your role in working with some of the customers, as they're trying to take what had been a general purpose monitoring platform and really start moving towards this observability construct, what are some of the things they really have to, consider and think about?
Yeah, so and these two topics are definitely related. So like on the one hand, microservices have kind of become a de facto cloud native architecture. So they have these small services that together make up the application. Because of that, you can scale them horizontally much easier. And that's great because you can scale out and leverage the cloud for that. The drawback of that is that now you have a lot of different microservices. If you want to understand the behavior of an application, you do need decentralization so that you can see the different telemetry from all these different systems in one place, right? And that's where observability comes in, right? And typically, people talk about observability in the sense of like you need metrics and traces and logs and events in the same place. And people forget to talk about, and you also need to have it over time and at scale, so you don't have to face the trade-offs that we talked about before, right? So we say that to have true observability, you need to be able to have cost-effectively all these different types of data, and that is typically what's missing, right? And so that's why we believe in the best of two worlds, the best of full stack observability in the sense of like having a single pane of glass across all your telemetry, but having the best of breed approach under the hood, so you don't balloon your cost and can have this data over time, right? And so when you're thinking about, okay, how am I gonna architect my application and how am I gonna, monitor and troubleshoot it, then I think it's essential to think about how does the system scale. How does the system scale the architecture that you pick, and how does the system scale the observability approach that you're picking, so that you can have, again, this best of two worlds, single pane of glass and not ballooning the costs. And this is also why, especially in this year where efficiency is top of mind and you need your costs to grow less than your revenue so that you can improve your efficiency, this is why today we have like the industry leading pricing for log and event at scale, and we even guarantee savings of 50% above certain scale, because of how important we think that removing this cost limit and the retention limit, which is getting limited with us, is to get true observability. The other part, the last part that I'll say on observability, is that people typically talk about it in the context of operational observability. Okay, I have applications that need to run, and I need to be able to monitor and troubleshoot. Cool. But then there's the whole other part about business observability, which is because, as we said, this event data is kind of today holds all the information about usage of an application. That is business data. That is all about all the information about how users are using your application as it happens. And today, there's a whole, it either is not used, it is stuck on the operational world, or there's a whole pipeline to try to aggregate it and just, creates a specific metrics that people think that are important for the business side. And we believe that business analysts should just have access to it in real time as it happens. And for that, you need this flexibility on your analytical tools, right? That's why for us, search and SQL on this cloud storage is key, so that you can use search to troubleshoot your application, and use SQL so you can do trend analysis, so that you can bring the business side of the house to the same analytical tool and have real-time insights about usage of your platform as it happens and with historical context.
Yep. And it's interesting in that, again, I defaulted and talked a little bit about, kind of some of the organizational issues that, kind of you run into, again, as you start to make that jump towards real observability, making sure that, kind of the dev folks have access to that, right? That the architecture folks have access to this data becomes absolutely critical, because again, they can't make decisions about what different users are doing or where they're getting, kind of stopped up, or what's not really converting as well as it needs to, unless they have access to that data, which gets back to your point about centralization and access to a common, data repository being, critical. And it's really just a matter of, again, the economics and the performance, and really the limitations of a lot of the existing technologies that have been trying to solve this problem for, gosh, as long as I've been doing this, and that's a long time, as I keep saying on that front. So,
the last point on that, we see the emergence today in this day and age of platform teams that try to do that, and platform teams mean different things for different people. But the way in which we see it is these teams that companies are creating to creating a central set of primitives or tools that are used across the organization. And in this day and age, people are still thinking about platform teams in the context of how do I help engineering and SREs we believe that it's broader, and that the reason why we believe that this centralizing log and event, the type of telemetry that is key across the organization, and then opening it up for not just engineering and SREs, but also cybersecurity and business, is a key part of a platform strategy for a company, so that you can have the same type of model, a centralized team, to have tools and primitives that are the same across the organization, but broaden it so that it's not just in the engineering side of the house, but across the organization.
That's right. That's right. And again, being able to leverage data across the organization to contribute to business value, right? That's really what we're trying to get to at that point. So as we kind of wrap things up, let's kind of transition and talk about generative AI, right? I mean, yeah, you can't even do anything today without, hearing about it, and, ChatGPT's, taking over the world, and you got to use the API, and, it's going to get all sorts of stuff for you, and really do your job. So, one of my daughters wants to be a film screenwriter, and we had to have that discussion of, you can differentiate above a machine, right? And the answer better be yes, or else it's going to be really difficult, to get a job. So, again, so when we ask the question, right, would generative AI significantly improve your ability to analyze your log and event data? The data was interesting, right? So 19% said, basically, I don't know, right? I'm too busy fighting fires every day. I just haven't given that, 10 seconds, worth of thought, which is totally legit, right? 5% say it's a gimmick, right? Another 11%, I'll probably try it, but I don't think it'll be very helpful. So that probably comes from the security folks, because that's your general skeptical, cynical perspective on everything, which is, and listen, when you get trained to figure out what's going to kill you every day, that kind of, perspective is pretty, logical from that standpoint. But, then we start to get into some of the areas, right? Yes, to help me understand outliers and suggest ways to troubleshoot faster, right? Yes, to be able to translate my questions into queries to ask my log and event analytics tool. And yes, to understand ever-changing log and event data quickly. And those last three, right, Andre, they really kind of put a point on a lot of the, kind of situations and use cases that we've been talking about already, right? Which is, we've got a whole bunch of folks that probably aren't good enough or as good as they need to be in order to, kind of do the job. And whether we're talking about security or digital experience or observability or APM or any of these other, specific use cases, you don't have enough people. They don't have the right skills. So generative AI may be able to fill that gap. Not entirely, right? But, maybe a little bit. So is that kind of where you guys, you kind of inferred that was, going to be the case when we talked about that earlier on, but let's kind of dig into it a little bit more.
Yeah. So first, I don't blame the 19% of I don't know. Not just like, do we all have busy lives, but also it's pretty early, right? Like, we are seeing new things in the generative world, AI world, coming out every week, right? And so as the capabilities evolve, how you can leverage it is evolving too. So, right. So this is a fast changing kind of area today. Then on the part of like, how can you actually leverage this for value, right? We see this on a few different axes. On the one hand, we've typically conflated this idea that I need to be both a domain expert and a tool expert. I need to know, like, how in a system, how do I look for potential threats? In a system, how do I troubleshoot it? How should I look at behavior of users to identify key features so that I can build more of that and create growth? And we've conflated that with like, I need to know tool X, or I need to know query language Y. And that's just like, those are two different things. You can have both things in the same person or not. But what this helps is basically to abstract to help abstract more the second, so that you can have a tool expert that is with you, that walks with you. And so I want to know how I can, leverage my data to look for potential security threats, and it can help you write queries. And also a tool that can help you with the former, so that, yes, I know what the questions I want to answer. I want to solve. I know I have a good domain experience about what I want to do, but there's more knowledge out there that I could be leveraging. And this basically generative AI allows you to tap into that knowledge. So I don't know. So if you have CloudTrail and you want to know, I want to see for potential access escalations in my infrastructure, here are the fields that you can use. here's how you can map your security logs to your MITRE framework, and so you can leverage and ask queries to the data depending on which phase of the MITRE framework you're thinking about, and you're in your hunting kind of phase, right? And so that is kind of like how I think. First, a new interface that works with you in natural language. Second, a way for a helper, both for you to take out the gap between domain and tool, so that all domain experts can leverage the best of their tools, and also so you can extend your domain knowledge, tapping into what's out there. And third, the reason why we think that this is key for our tool is because of these two things, right? Centralization, no retention limits at scale. Everything becomes harder with that. We're doing the hard part about how do you analyze it cost performantly at scale. This helps you understand how can I better leverage more and more value out of my data that is continuously changing and continuously growing. And so you can think about it as like alerts and dashboards V2, right? First we had dashboards to monitor, then we started having alerts. Now we have like noise everywhere. And the question is like, how do I get the signal out of this? And this can help you explore how you can get signal out of your data at scale.
Yep. Yeah, and what's interesting is that these three use cases that we asked about, and again, maybe it was a self-selecting type of thing, since I'm pretty sure we came up with the questions, right? Well, there are two pieces to this, right? So obviously the first one is, how do we interpret the data that comes in, right? And massive amounts of data. And obviously there's a significant lift on the part of training, the AI to understand the context and all those different pieces, given a lot of the unique aspects of every company's specific applications. So yeah, there's going to be 60, 50, 60, 70% of commonality. And that's what we kind of have to try to train on. And then, give it enough smarts to, be able to at least know what, some of these other, kind of edge cases would be, for specific customers. But then there's the remediation piece of it, right? And one of the demos that I saw at the RSA conference a couple months ago, Jesus. Time flies when you have no idea which end is up. But one of the interesting demos I saw was, the company, they did some AI, they, can identify some alerts, and then they had a little box and a variety of different, kind of languages, right? Different cloud platforms, different, kind of languages. And it said, powered by ChatGPT, right? Click the button and you get code. Right. So, again, one of the other aspects of the generative AI is to really start to help folks collapse that, kind of time frame between when I know there's a problem and when I can fix it. Now, did that scare the crap out of me? 100%, right? Because I know some folks are going to look at that, they're going to click the button and they're going to use the code, right? And man, those things still hallucinate quite a bit. It's like a decent, kind of LSD trip, from back in the day. So that's a little bit scary, but 6 months from now, man, with how quickly this stuff is going, 12 months, 18 months, the code's probably going to be pretty good, from that standpoint. So how do you guys differentiate, what you want to do on the analysis side versus, again, the remediation piece, knowing that, customers end up having to do both?
Yeah, so for us, it's a singular experience across, but definitely has a few of those components. And again, that's why I mentioned that it's very different to analyze infrastructure logs and security logs that are relatively structured with application logs that change all the time. And this tool can help you with both. Can help you with understanding what's structured because it's documented everywhere and how you can best leverage it, but also the things that change over time. They typically have nomenclature that is relatively straightforward. And the problem is that as things change, you have new things that you need to learn that you can now leverage. And so this tool helps you understand how, when new fields are created, and how you can best leverage to do your job. Right, and then on the analytics part, again, I think it has these two components. It has the component of knowing how to issuing queries to tools that are varied. In our case, Elasticsearch API and SQL API, and mitigate that gap of, I know what I want. Tell me what's the query, right? And that is right there. And then understanding how to go even higher level to understand, okay, I want to find potential threats. How do I map that to to analytics to then understand, okay, how do I find the needle in the haystack, right? And so those things for us are pretty important. But then there's some design principles that are key, at least as a product person, which is on the one hand, we don't share any data, or in what we're going to be able to announce, our belief is that you shouldn't share any proprietary data from the company with the models. And that's just for a security posture. Like when you're doing at scale, we have customers that are very, security focused, and so like sharing data is not an option. What we do to get the best of two worlds is potentially sharing metadata. And so with metadata, you can understand what the data means without actually sending any data to the model. And so we say we use it to ask the questions, not to give the answers. We give the answers. We run the queries. We just use the generative AI integration to potentially ask the questions. And the other part is this idea that it's an assistant. It's not supposed to do remediation on its own. It's not supposed to run queries on its own. It's supposed to give you a draft of a query that you should run to help you with that journey. But at the end of the day, you're the one that should decide what you want to do and edit it as you see fit. And so those are kind of like key considerations to think about.
Human assisted, right? We're not getting rid of the humans anytime soon. We're just trying to make them a little bit more efficient and effective. 100%. So as you could tell, Andre, we could probably go on for another 3 or 4 hours with these things, right? When some guys that are passionate about, kind of leveraging data, get on the horn, there's no lack of, discussion topics. So we've got our data, what you guys will see, anybody that's you watching the recording or folks that are here live, when we've got the Pulsemeter document ready, which should be within a week or so. We will email that out to you, so you'll kind of have both the graphics as well as the context and the descriptions for there. So keep an eye out for that in your email. We've got a couple of conferences coming up. Cloud Native Now on July 11th, Data Ops Day on August 16th. So again, you can get information. We've got the slides that are up in the handouts area, so you can get information about those specific shows if those are pertinent to your environment. And with that, before we hand it back over to Cody, Andre, any parting thoughts in terms of what folks really, kind of should have taken away from our little chat today?
First of all, thank you all for coming and for putting up with us for about an hour. I can talk about this for hours, as you can see. Check out ChaosSearch, and we on our website we have free trials. You can we have chat interfaces. You can communicate with us. Shoot me an email if you want to chat more about this. And keep in mind, whenever you're in the cloud, the key thing is how do you do things cost performantly at scale, and that's what we do for live and event data across your organization. That's right. And so thank you very much, and hope to hear from you all.
You bet. Thank you. Andre, thank everybody for being here. Hold on one second. So with that, Cody, you're back, man. So wrap us up, give away some stuff. That's what we like to do.
Happy to. Andre and Mike, thank you all so much for joining us today. That was an awesome hour filled with conversation that a lot of it did go over my head, but some of it stuck, and that's the important part. So I would like to remind our audience that this session was recorded. Should you want to rewatch, you will be receiving an email with a link to access this recording on demand. And of course, you can find it living on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars, and be sure to look in the on-demand section where it will be there waiting for you shortly. The 4 winners of our $25 Amazon gift card giveaway, they are Nancy W., Hossein M., Keith G., and Dami A. So to our 4 winners, congratulations. Keep an eye on your inbox to claim your gift card. It should make its way to you in the next 48 hours. If you don't happen to see that email, check your spam folder on the off case that it does get filtered out. I'd like to thank ChaosSearch for sponsoring this program. I'd like to give a shout out to Techstrong Research for conducting the polls and surveys that went behind all of the data that we showed to you today. And to our audience, thank you so much for being here with us. We really appreciate you spending your time here with Techstrong Learning. And we do just want to ask for one more moment. As soon as we close things out, there will be a survey that pops up on your screen, and we'd love for you to stick around and fill that out for us. Give us your thoughts either about today's program or, of course, if you have any suggestions for future topics, we want to hear what you have to say. Either way, we hope to see everyone at a future Techstrong Learning Experience. Have a great rest of your day. And Andre, Mike, thank you all once again.
Thanks, everybody.
Mike,
It's a lot of fun.
Cheers. Thank you, everyone.